All right, folks, it's time for the news here on Pod TV and World Edition. We'll see who joins us and all along those lines. But as always, there's a lot of things happening in the world and all along those lines, including Donald Trump saying that Kamala Harris has an app that will directly go to the migrants and everything. So Donald Trump claims that migrants have a phone app direct to Kamala Harris during a speech at Trump Towers on yesterday. In his remarks to the press at Trump Towers, the former president sought to blame the Biden administration for the migrant crisis. He claimed, in addition to her phone app, something totally new. It's a phone app for migrants where migrants called in. She's allowed to press a button and schedule apparently a appointment to be released into the interior of our country. That's what he said in his remarks and all along those lines. So I'll see whether folks got anything to say about these latest remarks and all in that kind of way. And Putin draws a nuclear red line for the West. Russia rattles the nuclear saber again as Ukraine devastates its munitions. So that's something that's also in the world news and all along those ways. And Israel keeps bombing Lebanon with Hezbollah and civilian deaths rising as Netanyahu shifts tone on a ceasefire. So that's something else that we're seeing in the news as well. And U.S. and Israel are at a standoff over the Lebanon ceasefire proposal. Netanyahu says Israel shares the aims of U.S. truce proposal after rejecting it. So he walked back the Lebanon ceasefire comment, saying he shares the aims of the U.S. plan. And Japan's ruling party elects Shigeru Ishibe as its new prime minister. Japan gets a new leader who wants to remake the U.S. military alliance. And some people are calling this particular gentleman an oddball leader who wants to boost military and beat deflation. So that's something that we'll see how this works out in the sense of the West relations and all along those. And Yemen's Houthis are claiming to have targeted Israel's Tel Aviv and Ashkelon. So that's something else that's in the news as IDF intercepts Houthi missiles and the Air Force ready for a Lebanon operation. So that's something else in the news. And a new Chinese nuclear attack submarine has been sunk, according to what U.S. officials say. So U.S. claims Chinese nuclear attack submarine sank this year, and definitely that'll be interesting to see how they react and all along those lines. An Australian woman is a person of interest in a Ghanaian romance scam investigation. So scammers hire models to fool Americans, and definitely that's something else going on as well. And migrants from around the world are trying to reach the U.S. via charter planes, and Mexico's anti-monuments force country to remember its missing. So definitely that's something that's going on as the families of 43 missing students in Mexico are still demanding justice 10 years later. And the Belgian prime minister demands action from the Pope over sex abuse scandal. So that's something that's going on as well. And Argentina records sharp rise in poverty. So there's a rise in poverty in Argentina. Poverty in Argentina soared by over 50% as the government austerity bites. So that's something else that we're seeing in the news as well. So lots going on in that sense. And Argentina's poverty rate spikes in the first 6 months of President Milei's shock therapy. So that's something else going on as Argentina's poverty rate soars above 50% under the leadership of Javier Milei. So that's something else going on in the news as well. And Austria's far right is set for a comeback with a nod to its Nazis past. So a far right party is looking for a historic election win in Austria. So it definitely looks like Austria's xenophobic right edges toward victory, and definitely there are some folks, including some of those at The Guardian, that saying that this is the normalization of racism, apprehension, and prospect of election success for Australia's far right. And Israel concealed explosives inside the batteries of pagers sold to Hezbollah. That's something that's going out as well. So Hezbollah's exploding walkie-talkies, probably among many counterfeits, according to a radio maker. So that's something else that we're seeing in the news as well. And Hungary would have given in to Russia, according to Orban's top aide. So that's something else we're seeing in the news as Hungarian Prime Minister Orban's aide sparks outrage with Soviet invasion comments and all along those lines. So definitely lots going on, including news going on about Myanmar, because Myanmar rebels have rejected the embattled junta's peace offer. So Myanmar military urges anti-coup forces to give up struggles and join the talk. So that's something else that we're seeing as well in world news. Let's see what's going on in the U.S. And then I see that some of the fellow panelists are coming in as well, so they got to say what they've got to say about a number of things going on, including Floridians inundated by Hurricane Helene. So Tampa International Airport reopens following Hurricane Helene, but definitely looks like there's tracking power outages right here in North Carolina and South Carolina, and over 1 million outages reported amid Helene. And Alabama inmate Alan Miller has been executed with nitrogen gas. That took place on yesterday for the 1999 shooting. So that is their second nitrogen gas execution. And apparently he had some disturbing final words as he was executed after the first attempt failed to kill him, and all in that space. And late night roast New York Mayor Eric Adams over his indictment. So New York City Mayor Eric Adams surrenders to federal authorities to face corruption charges, and all along those lines. So that's something else that's in the news as well. And Harris is to call for tougher security measures in the first trip to the southern border as a nominee. So Harris heads to the southern border looking to flip the script on the immigration criticism. And in 2021, she distanced herself from the border. Now she's heading toward it. So it'll be interesting what folks got to say about that as well. And Trump is to meet Zelensky amid GOP tensions over Ukraine assistance. So Trump to meet Zelensky as Harris visits the Mexico border. And apparently that's some of the other things going on in the news as well. So like I said, it looks like a lot of things are going on. And one of the big stories, of course, is the weather and Zelensky's visit and all in that space. So definitely we'll see what happens in that kind of way. And the Donald Trump fraud ruling could be reversed, according to appeals courts indicates and everything. So New York appeals court yesterday called Trump's $454 million civil fraud judgment troubling. So the massive civil fraud verdict against Trump got a frosty reception at the New York appeals court. And one of the other things going on is apparently Trump is now promoting not just his crypto coin, but he's now also got a watch that he is promoting as well. So there's a watch that he's got as well. So that's part of his campaign. And California apparently will formally apologize for being complicit in slavery. So Gavin Newsom signed California's apology for slavery and discrimination, as Governor Gavin Newsom earlier had dealt a blow to reparation efforts in California. But it does look like as of yesterday, he signed this California apology for slavery and discrimination and all along those lines. So like I said, get into some of the other things going on in the world, and we'll have discussions about a number of these things. I'll bring in Rick Rosner. I'll bring in actually my fellow co-host, Steve Rao, who's here with me and everything. I covered a lot of things, Steve, but you might have something you want to add. And
I'm here for a few minutes. Kind of a rough day with the weather. I'm at PBS Carolina. I just taped a show, and then I'm going to be on PTF. Actually, David Walker is going to be my guest today. One of my guests talking about the debt and the elections and everything. That's going to be exciting. And today on PBS, we talked about the governor's election in North Carolina, and I think that pretty much everyone agreed that Stein's most likely going to win, double digits in the polls. The question becomes, will this have a down ballot effect on council state races, legislative races, or will it just be that, okay, that was a bad candidate, let's go vote for Trump? I think Leonardo Inge, who was on with me, raised a good point. I think that this state often does split ticket voting, so I don't think Democrats can just assume just because Stein's going to lead the ticket by 53, 54%, 52%, that all those other candidates are just going to ride on his coattails, because people still want Trump to be president in a state that, believe it or not, is 42% in rural areas. So we talked about that. We talked about Jessica Holmes, labor commissioner, and the Supreme Court races, which, Mark, we don't talk about courts a lot, but that's an important race as well, in terms of just like voting rights and education and felons at voting and stuff like that. And then looking on the Wolf scene, I didn't really have much time to prepare. All I know is that what's really surprising is how you would think that Israel would heed the warnings of President Biden and the UN and everything, but they're still cracking down. And, it really has me worried about innocent people, Palestinian, Lebanese, dying every day. And this Netanyahu is just not backing down. And I just don't understand how this is going to affect U.S. foreign policy. But certainly I hope that it's something that's factored into, right?
Yeah.
In terms of what we're doing here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's tough because everybody over there is a dick, except the Israeli people, and they're only semi-dicks, but like Hamas, murderous dicks, Hezbollah, murderous dicks who fire thousands of rockets into Israel, and Netanyahu, a dick who's is avoiding prosecution by perpetuating these wars that are necessary against Hezbollah. It's like there's no good answer. There are no good guys in this thing except maybe some innocent. But I mean, even in Lebanon, it's tough. It's a gangster government. Hezbollah tells the people of Lebanon, we're going to keep our weapons in your houses, and you try to defy them. And anyway.
Sasha, you have something you want to add?
I'd like to mention that as a result of Hezbollah's shelling of Israel for the last several months, more than 100,000 Israeli citizens had to be displaced and leave their houses, their places of work, schools for children and so on, and they have to be moved elsewhere to avoid this. And I don't understand the reasoning that it's Netanyahu and he's doing this and that. The government, the major function of the government of each country is to protect its citizens. If that government cannot do it, it's not a government, it's a joke. So Netanyahu, who is by now, I don't know what's happened in the future, but there will be election. He probably will lose election. He will not be able to form a cabinet, and he will be ousted. Maybe he will be tried. Maybe he will end his life in jail. It's all possible. But right now, he is at the head of Israeli government. It's well supported by Israeli citizens, because when you have a leader who is doing the right thing, which is to protect its citizens, the citizens will be always supporting this leader. And that's exactly what's happened to Israel. So this is incredibly stupid position for many people to say, oh, Israel is a good country, it's great people, but Netanyahu, he's a murderer, he's this, he's that, and he has to be replaced. You don't hear that in Israel. In Israel, people support Netanyahu, at least while the war is lasting with Hamas.
Can I just very quickly say something? Because I know that Steve's got limited time. Steve, as you know, I've been to North Carolina a number of times, and I really haven't spent much time in Raleigh. And I was out today talking to some of my lawyers, and I was going through the city, and somebody actually mentioned the Research Triangle in the United States. And I said, whereabouts in the United States? And they said, oh, I think it's in South Carolina. And I said, do you mean North Carolina? So I just thought you'd get a bit of a buzz out of knowing that people all the way over here in Australia have actually heard about the Research Triangle.
I'll tell him, I'm speaking to him later today, but, that's interesting. Yeah. That's good to know. I mean, I know the CEO of RTP, it's interesting. This is an interesting story, and I got a few more minutes before I got to head out. And I promise, guys, after November 5th, I'll be back more on a regular basis. But what's funny is the research park, the true story of the Research Triangle, it was started by a man named Archie Davis. And at that time, North Carolina had a governor named Luther Hodges. And Luther Hodges had this idea of creating a research park. As he said, we have these 3 universities in the land that's shaped like a triangle. And why don't we do this? But we need money. So Archie Davis was a banker. He took a year off. He raised about $1 million from bankers, from union workers, from workers, and said this park is for the park of the people of North Carolina. And the rest was history. They bought the land and created this research park. And then eventually IBM came in and big companies came in and it's quite amazing. Today, over 20,000 companies are in RTP. We've got Duke, we've got UNC Chapel Hill and NC State, and now you got just the economy's really booming here. But what they did is, and I've kind of look at RTP 2.0, they're doing a lot of mixed use and apartments. They got this new thing called the Hub, which is pretty interesting. So glad to know. Hopefully we'll do some business in Australia. And
well, look, I think countries all over the world and individual areas all over the world are looking to do the same thing. Government should be promoting businesses and should be trying to attract people from from other countries or from other parts of the country to come to certain areas. And what you've done in Raleigh, although it has obviously attracted a lot of people that have turned North Carolina a little bit more into a swing state, what you've done is you've actually attracted a lot of people. That's built the economy. And I think that's fantastic. It's a blueprint for a number of other places around the world that have similar opportunities available to them.
And Shaquille, along those same lines, there have been, and Steve can speak to me about this as well, but there have been a number of companies and areas that have tried to duplicate that. I know where my mom lives in Rocky Mount, they've tried to build like a RTP 2.0 and all along those lines. So there have been some people that have seen that model and everything. And ironically, I'm not surprised about the South Carolina, North Carolina rivalry that's existed there for a number of years. A friend of mine who I could probably be visiting, depending on what the weather does tomorrow and everything, is from Rock Hill, South Carolina and everything. And even some of their areas, they sometimes are trying to pull from each other. Because I know that even though we have a football team here, the Carolina Panthers, and the practice facility, or at least one of the practice facilities, is in South Carolina. There was always speculation, because they're seen as a North Carolina and South Carolina team, that Rock Hill and South Carolina would try to pull the team away from North Carolina. So there's
in defense of Australians, you guys have got 50 states. I don't think that they were trying to say anything negative by assuming it was a South Carolina. It's just that we don't know. I do, but most people aren't going to know from America.
I didn't take that as a negative. I was just adding that there is a rivalry between South Carolina and North Carolina. Sometimes they try to pull businesses from each other. I did have a question for you, Shaquille, and Dan may be interested in this as well. And I saw that Rick had his hand up as well and everything. But one of the things I was curious about is how much political warfare is going on, and maybe Steve's got some thoughts around this as well, with campaigns, because we know a lot of people were upset, and you kind of alluded to it, Steve, earlier, with what's going on with Mark Robinson and everything. But now we got the opposite side of that from the Democrats with what's going on with Eric Adams, and some people may even make a parallel between that and the prosecution of Trump's cases and everything. So I just wondered, how much do we feel that there is political warfare going on both sides of the aisle and everything?
Before we respond, Rick clearly has something he wants to say, so let's get it.
Well, just to that, you had two New York mayors in the news yesterday. You had Eric Adams, who's a Democrat, but mostly just a piece of crap. And then you got Giuliani, who's a Republican who was remembered as New York's greatest mayor after 9/11, who has now been disbarred in Washington, D.C. He's 80 years old. He wasn't going to be doing much lawyering anyway, but I don't think that the political fallout, New York is Manhattan. The city of New York is very belongs to the Democratic Party. It's going to change there.
I've got to run, but I wanted to just get a sense of what, as I close out my part of the show, just to get a sense of like what's going on in Ukraine, maybe from Dan Worthington, what he's seeing from his Republican colleagues. Shaquille, if Harris does win, I promise we won't put Mark Robinson's name forward as ambassador to Australia. Just a joke. Although I think he would be a great ambassador to Venezuela. So maybe if Trump wins, that could be, because I think he's going to have to leave the United States to get a job at this point, unless he gets a job at Fox. Hey, I'm just trying to humor here, a little comedy improv.
Things do not look good. Things do not look good for him at all. And clearly, like I said last week, hey, I think he'll overcome it and he'll win. But clearly, like anything's possible in politics. But clearly, he's got an uphill battle from where he is. I don't share your view that it will likely affect the presidential election.
Yeah, I'm hearing that more on the ground now, down here. Quite frankly, I think that I think what I look at it is people might just be kind of saying, well, I mean, North Carolina split ticket a lot before, right? So,
The
you know,
tickets
they could just say
even with
governor's
the-
race, and we're going to vote, so,
Mm.
yeah. that's
But
probably-
if I can just talk about warfare just for a moment.
yeah, please, yeah.
So I know lots of people think that I'm very right wing. I don't think I am, but that's fine. I'll leave that aside for a minute. My frustration with my own government, which I then share when I'm talking about US politics, is that I had to leave Australia at 28 in order to try to do what I couldn't do here because regulations were so onerous. I couldn't do it here. And I don't think that 28-year-old Australian or American or Canadian or whatever should have to search overseas to be able to do things that they should be able to do now. So I get quite frustrated with that. Now, I think that when you hear and you get very caught up in what the leaders of political parties are doing, what ends up happening is people end up fighting against each other because, hey, you like John Smith and I like Joe Blow, and people end up fighting about that. Where what should be happening is people should be saying, hey, I want to start this business. I've got this great idea. Hey, Rick, I've got a great idea for a TV show. Let me run it past you. Tell me what you think, right? Rick should be able to say, hey, I love it. Let's do something with it. Or Shaquille, hey, good idea, but it's never going to work. Without there being any reference to who I think is a better politician. That shouldn't matter too much. And I think what's happening today is that people are getting so caught up in politics that it's interfering with their desire or their ability to actually achieve things. And I think that politics is, in the Western countries, I think politics is taking too much of a place in our lives. And so that's why I'm always advocating for less government, because I don't want politicians to be too involved.
Well, this is a great way for me to end because I got to hit the road. But and I would like to get an update from Sasha Starr, but I'll do that on Monday.
Yeah,
Or Sasha, if you can just update everybody on Ukraine. But I'm with this. I think the politics has just gotten so divisive. And part of the problem is that it's a situation now where people are being told to hate something without really knowing all the facts and being willing to talk to the other side. And I think part of it is the result of technology and the division we're having, also the amount of money that is required to win these offices. And I got to be honest with you, I have never in my life seen it so bad. And I myself cannot wait for these elections to be over because the intensity and the fear, and it's not. And meanwhile, we're killing each other, and we're not doing what's best for the country, which is solve problems. And
but Steve, do they ever really end though? Because I know Shaquille joked about this as well and everything. Because it seems that as soon as the one election is over, you're already going into the next election. So I really wish that there was some.
You're campaigning all the time, but we can't have a healthy debate about is the economy better or not? What are the things that Trump did? What are the things that Biden did that we like? What are the things that we don't like? What do we want? I mean. And so anyway, I've got to run, but I'll come back on Monday. We'll talk about that.
Have a great weekend, Steve. Good talking to you. I'll give you a call over the weekend. So.
And I did see your hand, Rick. But Shaquille, just really quickly, because one of the things that is interesting, and I'm going to turn it over to Rick and everything, is that sometimes when there is some of this political things that goes on, it's like the substitute or the person that's going to come in is actually a worse candidate. Because one of the things I'm learning, and I'm just learning this now, is that apparently the person that will step in for Eric Adams is what you sometimes talk about, which is a far left candidate. So they're even farther left than Eric is and everything. So he's been accused of all this corruption and everything, but it's like a democratic socialist, I think, is supposed to be coming in as the head of New York.
I really want to respond to that, but I know Rick wants to say something. So Rick and then Sasha, but please, if we come back so I can respond.
I just want to go back to Israel Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is what happens when you have a gangster government. And there was a crazy thing that happened 4 years ago. Beirut was somebody, likely Hezbollah, was storing 6 million pounds of ammonium nitrate, which is a fertilizer, but it's also an explosive. It's what blew up Oklahoma City. 6 million pounds of ammonium nitrate blew up on a dock. area in the middle of Beirut with the force of a nuclear explosion, leaving 300,000 people in Beirut, the capital of Lebanon, homeless. And the investigation into this was stopped by Hezbollah because they run Lebanon. And who runs Hezbollah, and Sasha can talk about this, is Iran, which is a 90 million person powerful country that has all these puppet governments surrounding Israel. So, Lebanon is a puppet state where Iran funnels all its, weapons and funding and 6 million pounds of explosive.
Yep.
Sasha?
A slightly different subject. I would like to mention something that in this election in US, everything what each candidate does is being amplified throughout United States and the world as well. Both candidates are very influential, not only for their own base, but for many others, even those who still undecided or decided to vote for another candidate or so on. So what I would like to mention now that I talked about it here and there, but now it became obvious 100% to me that I was listening in Russian to remarks of Putin and his commentators on Russian TV, and what what Trump said about Zelensky in the last 48 hours or so. They are exactly, it's not even talking points, it's a word per word translation of what Putin and his media is talking about. This is so upsetting. And never mind, he can still win election, of course. So we will have, as the head of United States, a person who promotes word per word. He doesn't even adjust. So it seems to me how it works is that he has a translator of whatever Putin says and his people, and he doesn't even correct it or adjust it in any way or do something with that. He just repeats word per word. This is extremely upsetting, and most likely that's what people should be aware, those who are watching for him. Just be aware, okay, he's great for economy, he's great for border issues, but there is international issues which are highly alarming.
Dan?
Yeah, Ukraine has a right to defend itself, just like Israel does. So we agree on that. I do think, though, there is a difference between Hezbollah and the Russian government. Sasha would disagree. And there are historical elements of the relationship between Ukraine and Russia. And those, if you listen to Kennedy, for example, talk about the history of the relationship to the United States and Ukraine and the agreements that were in place and all that, this war has been very destabilizing, and it shouldn't continue on because of the loss of human life and everything else that's going on. It's destructive of so much heritage and so many cultural sites in Ukraine, right? And it's harmful to people because many have lost their lives, many have been displaced. It's wrong, but you shouldn't give Russia a prize for its bad behavior. So, it is a thorny issue and difficult. I don't know what Trump said. I don't know what Putin said. You said they said something similar. I think that Trump wants there not to be war in Ukraine. I think Putin wants a way out because it's been very damaging to them, both militarily and economically and politically, in not only in their own countries but around the world, right? So the Russian people are suffering because of Putin's policies. The Ukrainian people are suffering because of Zelensky's policies. Ukraine is not a democratic country anymore. Zelensky is a dictator. Many, and in the United States, when we were at war with the Axis forces and that kind of thing, there are certain civil rights that were suspended. So I understand that. So I'm supportive of Ukraine defending itself, Skadu. Offensive weapons, I'm not so sure I'm supportive of that. Extends the war beyond the borders of Ukraine. I think Sasha would say, well, that's the only way they're going to beat them. I don't know if there are any victors in the war between Ukraine and Russia. I know the West would, quote unquote, benefit if Russia were, quote unquote, defeated, but I don't know. Because of the relationship between China and Russia, I think all you do is have the Chinese feel the power vacuum. So it wouldn't benefit us at all. In fact, it'd be very dangerous for us and destabilize the world.
Dan,
because there is a balance. Go ahead.
I would like to correct in what you said is that Russians are suffering because of the Putin's actions, and Ukrainians are suffering because of the Zelensky actions.
Yep.
So, in your opinion, Zelensky is not right when he opposed a Russian invasion, but he had to resign right away.
No, he was right to do that. I already told you that he had a right to defend. You have a right to defend your country, right?
Okay, so what's now? The will of, and not just Putin. There are a lot of Russians who openly, or maybe not so openly, support the war. They are not justifying the beginning of the war because it was horrible. But once the war is there, it doesn't matter who started the war, but we must win the war. That's thinking of majority of Russian people. Now, Ukrainian people, that there are a lot of common in mentality of both Ukrainian and Russian people. They're all Slavic people. They're quite close to each other. They're different, but they're close, okay?
Yeah.
And Ukrainian people believe that they must defend their motherland at any cost, at all costs, and it's not Zelensky. In fact, Zelensky cannot even stop the war now because the Ukrainian people will uprise against him. They will never agree to leave Russia as a winner of this war. Now, what Zelensky wants, he wants a just peace. Just peace is a nice word, but unfortunately what's happening now, I will talk more about it on a Ukrainian show. The will of both sides, the will to continue the war much greater than the will to stop the war. And this is not Zelensky and Putin, it's the Ukrainian people versus Russian people. It applies to both sides. By the way, if you remember the First World War, Second World War, especially First World War, it ended by exhaustion of all sides. If it wouldn't be for the United States, it would be probably some kind of a draw, whereas both sides would agree to stop the war simply because they couldn't fight anymore. They didn't have ammunition.
May I ask you a quick question here?
Okay.
Obviously, there's a number of other countries in Eastern Europe that were formerly part of the USSR. Do the majority of them support the Ukraine? I assume they do. And are they doing things to help the Ukraine?
Oh, a lot. I mean, look, Baltic countries, they're sending help in GDP of their countries. They're talking about 5, sometimes even 10%. They're sending all the weapons, ammunitions, anything, money, anything, whatever they can do. They house Ukrainian who had to leave the country, and they provide housing. Poland did a lot as well. because I even talk. I have a friend of mine in Poland, and he told me that his family, it's himself and his son, with his own family already, they housed 12 Ukrainian people. They provided housing, they provided food, they provided everything. And now youngsters are going to schools here and so on. So, of course, all these countries are helping Ukraine a lot. Coming back to the peace situation, based on what I know and what I heard from many sources, the peace at foreseeable future is impossible simply because they are getting there to complete exhaustion. Both sides, they are getting there, but they're not there yet. And the will to continue the war with the obvious aim to win this war, and at least not to lose this war, is much greater than willingness to do any negotiations.
Hey, Sasha, just really quick, along those same lines, and that's kind of what I was alluding to, even with the New York situation. So I'll make a parallel, and maybe Shaquille jump in this or not. But one of the things that people have always been concerned about is that when somebody is gotten out of government, whether that is through war or whether that is through politics and everything, that the replacement is worse, because that's kind of what people are saying now about what's going on in New York, because like I said, it's a democratic socialist and a very extreme democratic socialist, and I know that there's some of a parallel concern about Putin, that if the person that comes to replace Putin could be worse. So I was just wondering y'all's take on that, because that's one of the things I'm hearing now. I do have friends and maybe even a couple of family members that live in New York, and they're going like, wait a minute, yeah, y'all get rid of Eric Adams, but what could be replacing him could be much.
I'll just say, sorry, Sasha, I was actually listening. My battery was going dead. I just had to get my my battery back to plug it in, but I was listening to your answer. If we're going to pivot across to the United States, look, I actually don't think that when we talk about, somebody being an extreme socialist or an extreme right-wing conservative, etc., I don't think that is actually that correct when we're talking about the politics of the West. And look, Andrew Cuomo was replaced by Kathy Hochul. So are we going to be like, oh, she's worse or she's better? I don't think that these things matter that much. There are going to be some minor policy differences. But like I said before, people have, if you take politics away, people who may not agree on politics can still agree with each other. But when I went to Canada and met Sasha, I had certain people from our network saying, hey, you guys don't agree on politics. Just remember, he's a lovely, person, and don't. When we met, we barely even talked about politics. We mentioned a couple of things. We had a great time, right? Politics had nothing to do with it. I assume when I meet the rest of you guys, it'll be the same thing. As I used the example before about if I had some screenplay idea, we could entertain that, and he'd tell me it was good or bad. He wouldn't care whether I agreed with politics. When I talk to Dan, we talk about religion. I don't share the same religious beliefs as him. He'll encourage me to read certain things. I've read those things. I still don't agree with him, but that doesn't mean that we hate each other. We just have different opinions, right? So I really do feel that most of us are being torn apart and thinking that each other are enemies because, hey, I like this person and you don't. And when it comes to politics, if we're talking about somebody being more extreme in Russia, that's a different story to us thinking that, hey, the next person to replace Eric Adams is going to be even worse. If I don't agree with Gavin Newsom in California about a lot of his policies. I think he's an effective politician. I think that he will make a great presidential candidate, right? I don't agree with him on policy. But if Rick says, hey, I think he's awesome, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, Rick, I don't want to talk to you anymore. But that's kind of what's happened. People are getting into their silos about stuff that really doesn't matter that much. And I'll remind you guys in America, you're a constitutional democratic republic. Your politicians are limited in how much they can actually do. Relax. You're going to be okay.
And there was
I want to agree with Shaq that I don't think it matters that much who's mayor in New York. New York's like Gotham City. You have a bunch of entrenched power centers, and that you know the mayor doesn't have that much power. New York's had a bunch of mayors, some of them good, some of them just really super crappy, and the life in New York goes on.
There's no doubt about that. And just along those same lines, Shaquille, there was an argument on Facebook that I saw recently, and there was some of that conversation that you're talking about, because there was one person that was kind of like taking your stance, which was that you can have a disagreement of who you will vote for and who you don't vote for. But there was somebody else that came along with that same Facebook post. It was basically like, if you don't support my candidate, then I can't be your friend and everything. And I think that sometimes gets a little bit to the silly side and everything along those lines, because sometimes you have these drop dead things that are you're wanting to stick on your kind of like where you fall on that thing, and that can get a little bit disoriented, for lack of a better term.
Look, coming into your election now, your federal election now, or your presidential election, people had asked, I haven't shared this with Pod, people have asked me in the past, well, what do you what do you prefer? Now, yesterday or the day before, I actually said, okay, at this point, I think that Donald Trump would be the better president. But that's not what I'd actually been saying before. I didn't want to see Biden or Trump run. And if it was going to be a Democrat that wasn't Biden, there was a heap of people who I thought would have been great for the country. And I've mentioned Hakeem Jeffries as an example. Probably not right now, but I've mentioned him as a possibility. I think that America needs to get past what's happening right now, but they're not past it. So this is what you've got. I don't think that Kamala Harris is going to be a good president. So that's why I have serious issues which I express. If we pivot across to Australian politics, I'm really disappointed with the Australian Prime Minister. If we look at the United Kingdom, I'm really disappointed with the UK Prime Minister. Now, both of those Prime Ministers I thought was going to win, and I thought that they deserved to win because of how badly my side of politics had handled both of those countries. Having said that, if at the next election, Australia is likely to have an early election, if at the next election the current Prime Minister wins, I might be disappointed, but I'm not going to walk around angry at half the country that votes for that person. I'm just going to go, okay, well, that's the way it is, and I'm going to advocate for the policies I believe in for the next election. That's how our system works. And I think people have to recognise that it is a pendulum. You don't always get what you want. And sometimes you have some years where you've got to put up with a politician who acts in a way that you don't really like.
Hey, Shaquille, along those same lines, and I want to pivot again to another world issue and everything, just really quick, because I mentioned it, everything, and I can only imagine what it would be like, even though some people say the U.S. is about to go there and everything. But what is your thoughts, and anybody else that's done world travel, about this notion of Argentina having 50% of its population, that's 1 in 2, that are literally living in poverty? And I'm going like, whoa, that's a whole lot of people for a major country and everything to be that much in poverty. So when I saw that story, that was very scary to me and everything. So I don't know how they can correct that. I know we talked about economics even here from the United States standpoint, but it's an issue around other parts of the world as well. So what do you say when you see this major Latin American country that's got that kind of poverty?
I say that it's actually a worse reflection of us, not them. Mm-hmm. When I one of the first times I went to the United States and spent some significant time there, I saw when I was in North Carolina, when I was in Georgia, I saw some signs at a couple of churches talking about how 20% of the American population are food insecure. Mm-hmm. And I turned around and said, that's just a fancy way of saying that there's people that are going hungry. Now, the United States is the largest economy in the world, one of the wealthiest per capita countries in the world. The same statistics apply to Australia, Canada, etc., similar statistics. That's a worse reflection of us. Because if we, with all of our wealth, can't find a way to feed people and house people and educate people and clothe people, what do we expect from poorer countries who look up to us? So we need to get our house in order And we need to go to those countries like Argentina and say, this is what you need to do. Just one last thing. Sorry, Rick, if I can just say one last thing. I was in Kenya 3-4 times last year. And I was talking to a lot of government people, and I said, okay, well, what can we do about delivering food? They weren't interested. I was very surprised. They actually weren't that interested. They were very dismissive when I talked about food insecurity in Kenya. I found out later, and I saw some news reports over there, that there were Kenyan farmers who were actually letting their produce rot because they couldn't sell it, and it was more than what their local community could eat. And they were actually telling people, can you please come here and just take it? And this is something that we've seen in Africa. People often think that Africa is a barren place, there's lots of deserts there, and that's the reason why people are starving. No, there's enough food there, but it's mismanagement. It's mismanagement by governments, but it's also mismanagement by the NGOs and charities that go there from the West that don't actually address these issues. And again, to repeat myself very briefly, if we can't fix it in our own wealthy countries, we stand no chance of fixing it in the poorer ones.
So it's worse than you said, Mark. It's 4 people out of 7 in Argentina who are living in poverty. It's more than half. But I want to talk about Zelensky just for a second, how he was the right guy at the right time, and how crazy it is that he was president, because he's a stand-up comedian and a movie and a TV star who became president because in 2015 he starred in a TV show about a high school teacher who unexpectedly becomes president of Ukraine. And based on that show, he decided to actually run for president in 2019. And so he's done a good job. He's been heroic, but it's as if Jimmy Kimmel became president of a country. A late night host becomes president.
What about Ronald Reagan become president?
Right. But Reagan, I disagree politically with Reagan, but Reagan, was a good figurehead. He comforted America to some extent. But like Zelensky is the same. He's a good public face for the war, and I think he's done a good job.
At least
if you guys,
he cannot be accused of corruption. He was a very wealthy man by the time he became president. His net worth was about higher than $100 million. And so he cannot be accused of corruption or stealing or anything like this. He could do some other things not properly, but I'm not even sure what exactly he did improperly. He was offered by Biden when Russia started its invasion. He was offered by Biden a plane to fly to UK or some other places, and Zelensky said, "I need weapons, not the taxi."
If you guys had the option of installing the next president, but it had to be one of your former presidents, dead or alive, I'll go first here. Who do you think would be the best one of all the presidents you've had? I'll say it would be Eisenhower, given the current situation we're in. Who would you guys prefer to lead the country right now?
The top of mind is always Lincoln, because he took the country through the Civil War and was a folksy, great speaker who seemed to feel the pain of the people. But I don't know. And I don't disagree with Eisenhower. Eisenhower, having run World War II, having run D-Day, was a great administrator. He also knew how he hated the military-industrial complex. In his farewell address, he said, "Look out that military contractors don't take over the political process." So
unfortunately, it is.
I'll take that one and everything, because the person that I would have, and it might surprise people, it might not surprise people, even though there was the Cuban Missile Crisis, but I did like his remarks about ask not what you can do for your country, ask what you can, but that whole notion of everything, what you can do for the country and all of that along the lines. But I would say Kennedy would be my person and everything along those lines. So I would think that Kennedy, even though he had some weaknesses, I did like a lot of what he was doing in the sense of the social government, and some people don't like it, but I actually did like it. So I would go with Kennedy.
Dan, Sasha?
I would
Tony?
go surprisingly with Richard Nixon, but without Watergate. Or another, okay, if you're not happy with this choice, then I have Bill Clinton without Monica Lewinsky.
Yeah, I would be Ronald Reagan, without his Alzheimer's. He understood what the core problems in the United States were, and they still are the same problems. A lot of people, and there's a movie out on Reagan right now. I recommend you go watch it because he was really against communism and fought against communism and the influence of communism in the Actors Guild in Hollywood. The Russians were after influence peddling in the Actors Guild, and the socialists and the communists were really trying to influence that. We now know they have lots of influence there. But Reagan was strong and stood tall against communism and other types of aggression, and believed in traditional American values. He convinced Russia to take down that wall, he stood tall as a president and a leader. He still is considered a remarkable person in history at that time. But his kind of values are the kind of values that we should be looking at.
And he was the one who invented the evil empire for Soviet Union.
Yeah.
He was the one who focused on that.
Russians hated him.
Russians did not like him at all and everything.
But he was also very, very charming. Was able to connect with people. Yeah. He'd make his jokes, and he seemed like a friendly enough person and a relationship.
Him and Tip O'Neill were drinking buddies. I mean, he just got along with everybody. And in fact, when the Iran-Contra affair, heated up, they could see that his Alzheimer was getting the best of him, and the Democrats just backed down and said, "We're not going to put that man and his family through any of this. We're just not going to do it." And cheers for Reagan.
I have one more. George Washington, without the slaves and without the weird wooden false teeth, Washington was maybe our only nonpartisan president. He was elected unanimously. Before we fell into the two-party system, which was inevitable, but he'd be a unifying presence for everybody. He's on.
Well, I think that may be the case at the inception of the U.S. independence, but certainly the Whigs and the Democratic Republicans had differing opinions, and the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists had differing opinions, and helped to shape the country, which I think was necessary.
Yeah.
But look, I will say, coming into this election that you've got now, people obviously have very divided opinions between Trump and Kamala Harris, and I think that there's not really anybody saying anything particularly negative about Kamala Harris. The criticism of her is that she hasn't come out and given enough speeches, enough detail, enough news conferences, which I do think is problematic for her, and I don't think that's going to be a good strategy. So I think she needs to do something about it. As for Trump, people's criticism of him is, hey, he's divisive. He says things that are offensive. He's very, very caustic. But people are used to that. So I think coming into this election, it's going to be very interesting to see, one, who wins it, but two, how they actually act once they're in there, regardless of what their policies are.
And really quickly, Shelby, did you have a president you wanted to add that would be your one that you would pick of the past presidents? I was going to add that some people don't like him and some people don't, but Truman might be in the interesting category because we haven't had a minimum wage in a long time in terms of a raise, and he was one that raised it way back when.
I mean, for me, I would, in all honesty, based on the demographics of the country, I would take President Obama.
We were kind of looking for presidents not in the sort of present era. Was sort of where we were going. Is there a president from like yesteryear that you'd like to say?
I mean, president of yesteryear that isn't with us at the moment. I mean, honestly, well, Carter would be yesteryear. Would be, I guess, now, but before that would probably be Kennedy because he crossed the partisan lines and actually pushed forward on the civil rights movement.
And he was charismatic. Like Johnson, I think, pushed harder than Kennedy did to fulfill Kennedy's legacy. But Kennedy had really good hair, and so does Harris. I mean, hair is important for people liking a president. Reagan, great hair.
Yeah, Reagan did have great hair.
Great girlfriend too, right? Norma James certainly came in handy with
Well,
her
unfortunately, the
breathless,
CIA
breathless
killed
happy
Kennedy.
birthday, Mr. President.
Yeah.
And what's
Sorry,
wrong
man.
with Trump's hair? He has great.
I like Trump's hair, and it's gotten gray, so he's not Orange Man so much anymore.
Yeah, that's right.
Definitely not that anymore. That's very much true. But we're getting ready to wind down because I know we got not the economics, but the Russia, Ukraine, China show coming up in about a few more minutes and all along those lines. So if you want to give people a kind of teaser of what that conversation will be, Sasha, since we've only got a few more minutes since we're getting ready to go into there. So if you want to give folks a little bit of a teaser.
Well, you know that the format of the show is that beside me there is a Professor Jonathan Lockwood, who is a military man. He's a well-regarded doctor in this history, and especially military history. And I'm not sure if today we will have Ivan Kucherenko from Kyiv, Ukraine. So we have Canadian point of view, of course, and Ukrainian point of view, although because it's Friday, Ivan may not make it today. But what I would like today discuss exactly what's happened in the last few days. It's a possibility or impossibility to have peace between Ukraine and Russia. And we will take it from all points of view, from practical point of view, from military point of view, from citizens, both countries' point of view. And it's interesting where it will go. I respect his opinion very much. I will provide my opinion, of course, but I'd like to hear what he has to say. So that's in the short order.
Sounds good. Well, we'll be back next week with a lot of these conversations. And of course, there's other programming, including kind of what y'all alluded to yesterday as to whether interior designing can be a dangerous field or not, because the interior designing show, The Color Whisperer, will be coming up at 2:00. But right now, we're getting ready to get out of here.
Thank
Have
you.
a great weekend.
Take care, everybody. Thanks for the program. Take care.